Good afternoon, beautiful people from planet Earth and all other interdimensional entities across this wide expanse of space. Perhaps even from inside our inner Earth, because you never can tell where anyone comes from these days. Could be from anywhere. Just saying. I've been out, I bought 3 lovely pairs of shoes and kind of a clutch that turned out to be real leather, which I got for $20. So I'm very happy about that. And had a good fossick around, but I missed out on a lovely cowskin mat. Just missed it. Some lady just grabbed it before me. She said, "Oh, do you even think it's real?" And I said, "If you don't buy it, I will." Should have kept my mouth shut. I could have let her think that it was fake and then I could have grabbed it. But integrity is everything. You know what? I'm happy for her. She got a very good buy, that beautiful cowskin leather floor mat for $40. By the gods. And I was called to go in there. I've been called to go in there since this morning actually, but I was making my video earlier. So I was shunting it away going, oh, what do I need to spend money on nonsense for? What do I need to do that? But I'm glad I still went, because even though I missed out on that lovely cowskin leather mat, I got 3 nice pairs of shoes. Well, yeah, a low-heeled pair of shoes and very nice leather sandals and some other ballet slipper type things that'll be good for dancing and when my feet hurt. I can throw them in a bag from when my feet hurt. They were quite lovely actually, a little diamante rosette in the front. And yeah, that leather clutch which I'm using, excuse me, I've put it away to store my art supplies in, but I had a feeling it was leather. I thought, oh well, that's good. Got it home, ripped the bag apart. Yes, it had a tag inside that said it was leather indeed. So sometimes you get these really good little bargains in the second-hand shops. You know, if you're careful and you take your time, have a good look around. So there is that. We're going to go back. We got cut off when I was reading to you about Rasputin, and they mentioned something about page 27, going back there. But I can't see anything on page 27. I must have read that wrong. Oh, it's in a whole other book. Out of This World by Parrot Phillips. Phillips, a relative. It's my maiden name. Right, so well, that's disappointing because I would have liked to have read a bit more about. I know, here it is. I wasn't paying attention. Right, here we go. Let's read this little bit extra about Rasputin. Chiromancy. In 1925, Count Louis Heyman, the celebrated palmist and clairvoyant, whose professional name was Chiro. Yes, I remember my mum had a book by him. Yes, I used to look at that when I was a child, sitting up in the attic with all our, for some odd reason, she stored all our magical books all up in the attic. But I used to climb up there regularly, go through them, even though some of them were a bit too advanced reading for me. I used to delight in reading the pictures and trying to comprehend as much of it as I could comprehend. Made the following prediction about Edward, Prince of Wales, which is funny because the toe ring I made out of that demi-tasse spoon was a King Edward pattern by writing. So King Edward is constantly being referenced in the last 24 hours, so that's interesting. Anyway, it is within the range of possibility that he will fall victim of a devastating love affair. Oh, well, in that case, they were talking about Edward the, which Edward was he? Was he Edward the Third? Edward the Second? You know, the one that ran off with Wallace Simpson, that weakling. Edward the Eighth, there you go. See, I don't know my royalty very well, do I? I should have known it was King Edward the Eighth. By the gods. Anyway, carry on. I'm embarrassed to admit that I made that faux pas. Anyway, it is within the range of possibility that he will fall victim of a devastating love affair. It's nothing worse than a fucking devastating love affair, talking to the Queen of them. Not an actual queen, but by now I should be, given how much trauma I was put through with misfits and idiots. That's why I stay single, people. But anyway, here they write, if he does, I predict the prince will give up everything, even the chance of being crowned, rather than lose the object of his affection. And I've read since then that later on they actually weren't all that happily married after that immense sacrifice he made for that, the Yankee Doodle Dandy. But he was a weak man and he wasn't fit to be king. Just saying. Given what I said about my Uncle Mia, who was a sweet man but also a bit weak, he admitted you need a lot of mana to be a king. There you go. Just because you're the heir to the throne and the first son doesn't mean you are mentally and emotionally equipped for the task. No, I won't say it, but the current monarchy comes to mind. Just saying. Princess Anne would have made a far better queen than her older brother as king. That's just my opinion on that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me one jot, because they're only royalty by the act of birthright and good fortune, and we all have to be kings and queens of our own destiny and be the best version of ourselves and fight to keep our body, mind and spirits pristine. Nasty gossip is nasty gossip, even if it comes from my mouth. Well, it's true. Anyway, you kind of have to laugh. In 1936, King George V died, and the Prince of Wales became King Edward VIII. The eighth, people. Where the hell I got the second from, I don't know. That's way, way, way back in history. Anyway, his abdication 325 days later, that's not even a full year later, by the gods. And more than 10 years after Cairo's prophecy, in favour of his future wife, the twice divorced Mrs. Wallace Simpson, was made, he said, because he could not give up the woman he loved. They're always mean about her being twice divorced, though. I mean, I've only been divorced once. I promised I would never marry again because it's a complete waste of time. I know I need my freedom and my independence, and I never found a man worthy of me that was king to my queen and capable of being a good lover and provider and supportive and prioritising me and treating me with kindness and respect. And I never found a lover like that. I've got wonderful friends who treat me like that. I never found a sexual partner. If I found one that I had wonderful sex with who happened to also be a kind and honouring man, maybe I would have married again. But that's a terrifying thought, and we won't go there. It's just, I'm old now, and I don't need to worry about these things. Just saying. But anyway, they always bang on about Mrs. Wallace Simpson being twice divorced. But she had a lot of power over Edward VIII up until his abdication. A great deal of power. power of the Pusey. I don't know what. Oh no, see, there's the gossip coming in. Stop it, Tony. There's no need to be vulgar. But you know, she had something. She turned the head of a king. She had something going. I don't think it was her witty conversation per se. Although they were both Nazi sympathisers, so that's not cool given the times. But anyway, the whole thing was very, very odd, people of Earth. Very, very odd indeed. However, even though he abdicated his throne to this King of England, there is a mythology around the kings and queens of England when they die. And apparently, I read about it once, it was quite astonishing. It's something to do with birds. The birds will come and sing to them as they're dying, something along those lines. Anyway, Wallis Simpson, who was now Wallis Windsor, living in Paris with the former King of England, you know, what did they call him after that? I think he retained his title as Prince, but that was about it, Prince of Wales. Anyway, when he died in a Paris apartment, 3 or 4 stories up in an apartment building somewhere. And as he was dying, you know, taking his last breaths, hundreds of swallows flew to the closest they could get to his bedroom where he was lying was the bathroom, and they were all throwing themselves at the window trying to gain entry into the apartment, and it was seen as a mark of great respect that the birds don't know that you're no longer King of England. It was seen as some kind of herald that they were showing him homage at the point of his death. Sweet story. It happens to be true though. Apparently it was witnessed by staff members or, you know, ladies. They're not ladies in waiting, but what do they call them? Personal assistants or whatever they had going on there in Paris. Cairo, who warned the well-known English journalist William T. Stead that he should, also warned the well-known English journalist William T. Stead that he should on no account travel by water in mid-April 1912. Surprisingly, because of his deep interest in psychical phenomena, Stead ignored the warning, booked a passage on the Titanic, and was drowned on April 14th, which happens to be 2 days after my birth date. Well, anyway, if someone warns you not to cross water on a certain time, a certain date, you really should take notice, because, like, hello, how accurate was he? Even earlier, in 1905, Cairo read the future of the powerful and hated Rasputin, the mad monk of Russia, telling him, "I foresee for you a violent end within the palace. You will be menaced by poison, by knife, and by bullet. Finally, I see the icy waters of the Neva closing above you." 11 years later, the prophecy was fulfilled. That's a terrifying thought, isn't it? It wasn't all that much time later that came true. So I wonder what Rasputin's thoughts were as he was lying there in the freezing waters of the Neva, thinking, got a bit of deja vu. Someone mentioned this might happen to me someday. Wouldn't you freak out? I mean, imagine, you'd be like, I was told this is my fate. I guess it probably helped him calm down and accept his fate. Or alternatively, he might have tried to fight his way out of the ice. and lived on, survived yet again. Sometimes when someone tells you something's your fate and you accept it, doesn't mean you have to, people of Earth. Mama T fights everything, every day and every way. Unfortunately, it's the nature of my spirit. Right, Padre Pio. I had this son of a bitch, very ugly, gnarly little midget, kind of, not technically a midget, but he was little like me, a hobbit like me, with all broken teeth, and he was mad as a meat axe. And he was hot for me, but he was like elderly, and I wasn't interested in him anyway. At that time, I was in love with someone else. Oh, to my greatest chagrin. But anyway, so the vicious little creep said to me, he said, pointed the bone. I, at the time, was struggling with my gallbladder, I've been waiting for surgery. They dragged it out for 2 years, the bastards. Anyway, the old guy one day said to me something about, I like your spirit, Tanya, he said. I'm going to stock up on wild turkey. And so he says, when you die, he said, I'm going to throw a big party. I said, oh, are you? What kind of a party? Can I come? He's like, no, you'll be dead. Like, it was really nasty, like pointing the fucking bone at me. And I'm like thinking to myself, you bastard. Don't ever point the bone at me, because I'll point it right back at you. So anyway, I just looked at him and I said, oh yes, okay. I said, you'll need quite a lot of wild turkey because it'll be quite a big party. He says, oh, I know. He was American. I know, because you're really popular, which wasn't true at all actually at the time. That actually wasn't true. A lot of people at the Treasury Casino didn't like me, and hoping I'd crawl away and die, the bastards. So anyway, so he says, oh yeah, I'm going to stock up on all this wild turkey, and I'm going to come to your funeral, and I'm going to pour libations on your grave, because he knew I have an interest in voodoo, you know. He himself came from New Orleans, I believe, but had lived in New York. But so he used to rhyme me up about New Orleans. Anyway, another place I'll probably never see or get to. But anyway, so he was like, yeah, I'm gonna throw down these libations to your spirit in your grave. I smiled. Said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Said, why not? I said, it's a waste of good alcohol. Somebody could be drinking it. Yeah, but it's in honour of your spirit, Tanya. I said, all right. I said, here's what we're going to do. He says, what are you going to do? I says, I'll be lying there dead as a doornail and all that good alcohol going to waste. I don't see the point of that. I tell you what I'll do for you. You pour the libations, I said. I'll gather it up as precipitation. And he looked at me like this. And I went, I'll turn it into a nice, dark, smushy rain cloud. He's like, oh yeah. I said, and I'll just piss it right back down all over you. Would you really? I went, sure, why not? Dead people tell no lies. Anyway, I thought we were just having a bit of fun, being a bit silly, right? Being a bit cray-cray, a bit weird. 5 days later, literally only 5 fucking days later, I get a phone call from the Princess Alexandra Hospital. You've got to come in on, I think it was a Wednesday. You got to come in, we're booking you in, pre-admissions on Wednesday, blah, blah, blah. You're having your surgery. I've been waiting for 2 fucking years, but suddenly they made it a mad rush and a last minute stand in big fucking hurry. Anyway, I did actually die after that surgery because the anaesthetic knocked out my respiratory system. So it was not pleasant. And all I could think of was, fuck, that horrible little Yankee Doodle dandy that's wanted to fuck me for years and was getting revenge that I wouldn't fuck him because it's not my type. I don't sleep with anyone because they're madly in love with me and I'm madly in love with them. That's my ethics of what I'm sticking to now after the monsters I picked up over the years in the past. Anyway, I thought, right, that little weasel pointed the phone. I'm not happy about that. Anyway, 3 weeks later, I'm still pretty much in a fair bit of agony, quite frankly. I took myself back dancing to the casino, found that little Yankee Doodle dandy, doo-doo, step into his old doo-doo dirtbag, walked right up to him. I said, listen here, Richie. What? He could see the rage on my face. I said, you can just stop fucking pointing the bone at me because you nearly got your wish. What? He said. I went, yep, I died 3 weeks ago. Briefly. He went, why are you holding on to your side? I said, well, they put a drain in my side. It still fucking hurts. What? Why are you out dancing? I said, because no bastard's ever going to grind me down. Got it? Good. And he looked at me. He put his head back and he said, you're the strongest woman I have met in my whole life, Tanya. I went, good. Know it, understand it, and handle it, baby. He was just like, whoa. Anyway, for some obscure reason that makes no sense to me, I stayed friends with him for a bit longer, but then 2020 came along and, you know, I think he must have gone back to America because I never saw the old bastard again. I don't think he died of COVID, I just think he just went home. A lot of the people that were regulars that came from foreign countries went home, like Corey and Joe disappeared, I think he went back to Korea, and my transgender friend Shani from Thailand, don't know what happened to her either, but I think she went back too. So yeah, there was a few that just vamoosed back to their home countries. Wow. I considered it briefly during the COVIDian madness, but I thought New Zealand's just as bad as any other country on earth. Now they're all in it up to their necks, and I'll just Tanya Aarons' last stand, hold my own here in Brisbane, Australia. But anyway, before he disappeared, old Richie, I said one night, because just my humour, I said, Richie, yes, Tanya, I said, how many cartons of bourbon have you got stockpiled now? Looks at me all serious. Oh, a few. I mean, good, keep stockpiling. You're gonna need it. He was like, you crazy bitch. Yes, I am. I mean, even I had to laugh. But anyway, here we go. Padre Pio, Giovannino, Little John, could only crawl on his hands and knees through the streets of his hometown, Foggia, in southern Italy. He was 9 years old and had been born a hunchback, an object of contempt to children of his own age, and an object of pity to his elders. He was unable even to dress himself, for the curve of his spine brought his chin almost to the ground. To his parents, Giovannino's loneliness and deformity were a source of daily and enduring heartbreak. One day, as Giovannino was crawling along a street in Foggia, he felt someone touch his back. Unused to human contact in the street, he was startled. Suddenly he found himself standing upright, and he caught a brief glimpse of the bleeding hand of the monk who had touched him. "Padre Pio!" Giovannino called. "Padre Pio!" But the monk had gone. I've heard about him. He's a saint, I think, now. Giovannino ran and leaped like a lamb. At the door of his home, his mother asked him, in a formal manner, what he wanted. Then she recognized him and fell to her knees in prayer. "Padre Pio touched me with his hands," her son said again and again. Padre Pio was born in 1887 in the village of Pietrelcina near Benevento in southern Italy. When he was 17, he joined the Capuchins, an order of Franciscan monks, and for 11 years lived the quiet life of a novice. Then on September 20th, 1915, he began to experience pains in his hands, feet, and sides. Doctors could find no reason for these pains and had no reason to suspect that they were the prelude to something extraordinary. On September 20th, 1918, Padre Pio collapsed in agony during his prayers at the altar of the church in Foggia. His brother monks found him there, unconscious and bleeding from his hands, feet, and sides. The wounds of the crucified Christ had been duplicated in his flesh. They were to defy every medical effort to heal them, and he would bear them for the rest of his life. Among the many who viewed Padre Pio as a fraud, an attention-seeking trickster, was a Dr. Ricciardi, who lived in the town of San Giovanni Rotondo, not far from Padre Pio's monastery. One day Dr. Ricciardi was unable to rise from his bed. He sent for 2 colleagues, Dr. Merla and Dr. Juva. They concurred in their diagnosis. He had an incurable brain tumour. Dr. Ricciardi was a rationalist, a scientist, and a skeptic. If his relatives brought a priest to him, he said he would throw him out of the house, especially Padre Pio. All he wanted was to die in peace. I get his logic. But dying came hard to Ricciardi, for he found much pain and fear in it, and little peace. Yes, talk's cheap until you're faced with it, people of Earth. We've been faced with it 15 fucking times now, and the last one was kind of peaceful, I was kind of embracing it, but my oximeter thing on the thumb screamed, and that was post that surgery. Gave me away. I did consider slipping it off my thumb, then no one would have known that I was dying, right? It did cross my mind, but I thought, it's a shitty thing to do to the nurse. She'll get the blame for my death, and they were young nurses and they were doing their best, you know. Anyway, for some ridiculous reason that still makes no sense even to me, yet again I chose life. And I had about 5 near deaths after that in the ensuing 9 fucking years. 3 were within the ensuing 3 months. So someone really wanted me dead in 2019. Whoever they were, Mama T's still here, kicking on. Even with Louisiana Yankee Doodle Dandy's pointing bones at me, I'm still going strong, babies. Anyway, it's a bit astonishing and it makes no sense, but it is what it is. And those of you that love me are happy that I'm still around, and those of you that don't, you have your own journey of discovery to find your own soul and grow the fuck up and become not my monkey, not my circus. Right, where were we? One day, when death was not far off, the doctor looked up to see Padre Pio standing in the doorway of his bedroom. Who had sent for him? Ricciardi moaned. Who had sent for him? Padre Pio stepped to his bedside and began to pray in Latin. Peace to this house and to those who inhabit it. Enter, O Lord, together with us, and with our humble entrance let come in everlasting happiness, divine prosperity, joy and fruitful charity. Let the demons run out, and let the angels come. That's a nice prayer, a worthy prayer. Then Padre Pio asked Ricciardi if he would accept from him the holy oil used to anoint the dying. Ricciardi reached out and clutched the monk's hands, oblivious of the wounds in them. I accept, he said. Your soul is right, Padre Pio told him, and in a few days your body too will be right again. That Christmas, the doctor Ricciardi, his health fully recovered, attended Mass at the Church of St. Mary of the Graces. The year was 1929. As the century wore on, Padre Pio's fame spread across the world, though he rarely left the seclusion of his monastery. Many claim to have been visited by him when he was actually many miles away, and a prodigious number of cures were attributed to him. His personal manner was said to be down to earth and often humorous. He died on September 28, 1968, and his devotees impatiently await his canonization. That means he's not yet legally, in the eyes of the Vatican, a saint, because you need to be canonized to be recognized as a saint. So there you go. Isn't that a beautiful, I'm not Christian nor am I Catholic, but that's a beautiful story. Came to give him a peaceful ending, and then when he accepted, said, no, instead you're going to live. Babies. It really is that weird. It really is that weird riding the fine line between life and death, blessing and curses, love and hate, or love and indifference, or love and apathy, or love and envy, spiteful sabotage because they're so hateful they can't bear the thought of Tanya living happily ever after with her beautiful man by her side. been a repeat pattern of that in my life too. But anyway, I'm not worried about that because que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. A burning invitation. In the early spring of 1921, the Roman Catholic Bishop of Mysore in southern India was invited by the local Maharaja to attend an exhibition of firewalking at his summer palace. The performance was set for 6 p.m, but the bishop, Monsignor Despatures, who was eager to witness both the event and all the preparations for it, arrived at the palace early. The master of ceremonies was a Muslim from northern India, and on his instructions, a trench some 13 feet long, 6 feet wide, and nearly a foot deep had been dug. On the instructions of the Maharaja, however, who seems to have been as suspicious of the whole affair as the bishop, the Muslim himself had not been allowed to have any hand in the actual preparation of the pit. As far as Monsignor Despatures could tell, the firewalk had no religious overtones, but was regarded, at least by the educated Indians present, as no more than a spectacle or curiosity. In due course, a fire was lit in the trench, and the heat produced was so great that the Maharaja, his family and guests could sit no closer than 25 yards from the trench. The account continues in the bishop's words. The Mohammedan, according to Indian usage, came and prostrated himself before the sovereign and then went straight to the furnace. I thought that the man was going to enter the fire himself, but I was mistaken. He remained about a yard from the brink and called upon one of the palace servants to step into the brazier. Having beckoned to him to come forward, he made an appeal into which he seemed to put all his powers of persuasion. But the man never stirred. In the meanwhile, however, the Mohammedan had drawn closer to him, and then unexpectedly, taking him by the shoulders, he pushed him into the little lake of glowing ashes. It's a bit rude, isn't it? Unexpectedly, by the gods. For the first moment or two, the Indian struggled to get out of the fire. Then suddenly the look of terror on his face gave place to an astonished smile, and he proceeded to cross the trench lengthwise, without haste, and as if he were taking a constitutional, beaming contentedly upon those who were standing round on either side of him. His feet and legs were perfectly bare. When he got out, his fellow servants crowded round him to ask what it felt like. His explanations must have been satisfactory, for 1, 2, 5, and then 10 of the palace household plunged into the trench. After this, it was the turn of the bandsmen of the Maharaja's band, several of whom were Christians. They marched into the fire, 3 by 3. At this juncture, several cartloads of dried palm leaves were brought down and thrown upon the embers. They blazed up at once, breaking into tongues of flame higher than a man's head. The Mohammedan induced others of the palace servants to pass through the flames, and they did it without taking harm. The bandsmen went through a second time, carrying their instruments in their hands, with their sheets of music on top. I noticed that the flames which rose to lick their faces bellied out round the different parts of the instruments, and only flickered round the sheets of music without setting them on fire. There must, I think, have been 200 people who passed over the embers, and 100 who went right through the middle of the flames. Beside me were standing 2 Englishmen, the head of the Maharaja's police force, a Catholic, and a civil engineer. They went to ask for royal permission to try the experiment themselves. The Maharaja told them that they might do it on their own responsibility. Then they turned to the Mohammedan, and he motioned to them to go forward. They crossed without any sign of burning. When they came back into my neighbourhood, I asked them what they thought of it. Well, they said, we felt we were in a furnace, but the fire did not burn us. When the Maharaja stood up to mark the close of the proceedings, the Mohammedan, who was still standing close to the trench, fell writhing upon the ground as if in an agony of pain. He asked for water. They brought it, and he drank greedily. A Brahmin who stood near me remarked, "He has taken upon himself the burning of the fire." Two weeks later, the Muslim gave another exhibition in the city of Mysore, at which many people walked through the fire with impunity. But at the end of the event, after the maestro had warned that no one else should make the walk, 3 people forced their way into the trench. They were badly burned and had to be hospitalized. In conclusion, the bishop wrote, "I was in full possession of my faculties. I went round the trench before the proceedings began. I went back to it again after all was over. I spoke with those who passed through the fire, and I even said a Hail Mary or two, with the view of arresting any exhibition of diabolic power. It was beyond doubt a real burning fire, which consumed the charcoal and sent up in flames the cartloads of palm leaves that were thrown upon it. But it was a fire which had lost its power of injuring those who crossed it and all that they took with them. How can we account for it all? I do not think any material cause can explain it. No expedient at any rate had been employed to produce such an effect. I am forced to believe in the influence of some spiritual agency, which is not God." How does he know it's not God? Why do they always assume, because they can't understand something, that it's evil or demonic? I mean, really. Monsignor Despatoures's description of this event was made in a letter to Olivier Leroy, the French author of a study of such cases entitled Les Hommes Salamandres, Human Salamanders. With the bishop's permission and help, Leroy checked the story with others who had been present. All agreed with the main points of the bishop's story, but differed in some details. An Englishman named Mackintosh, for example, estimated the length of the trench at 30 yards, though perhaps he meant feet, and the number of firework walkers at 500. Mr. Lingeraj Oers, on the other hand, recalled the trench as being 4 feet wide, 15 feet long, and 5 feet deep. Leroy also discovered that Mr. Oers and a Mr. J.C. Rollo, the principal of Mysore College, kept their boots on to negotiate the fire. Neither pair of boots was damaged, and neither man experienced any burning sensation. There you go. The sudden health of Jack Traynor. In World War I, Jack Traynor of Liverpool, England, suffered 2 bullet wounds. One left a hole in his skull that refused to heal, and the other, which severed nerves that not even a most skillful surgeon could join, had left him with a paralysed and atrophied right arm. He was awarded a total disability pension. By 1923, Traynor had begun to suffer from epilepsy, probably triggered by the head wound. He was now unable to walk. That same year, he was taken on a pilgrimage to Lourdes, France, where he was lowered bodily into the communal bath. 4 days later, he jumped out of bed, washed and shaved himself, and walked out of the hospice unaided. After he returned to England, he went into business as a coal merchant, married, fathered 2 children, and lived a normal life for the next 20 years until his death of pneumonia in 1943. During this time, the Ministry of Pensions, refusing to believe that someone who had been pronounced totally disabled could become mysteriously totally cured, continued to pay Traynor the full disability pension. Although it was never declared miraculous by the Catholic Church, the cure is inexplicable. Tibetan yogis and body heat. To spend the winter in a cave amidst the snows at an altitude that varies between 11,000 and 18,000 feet, clad in a thin garment or even naked, and escape freezing is a somewhat difficult achievement, observed Alexandra David Neal in the late 1920s. And yet, she wrote, numbers of Tibetan hermits go safely each year through this ordeal. In her book about the 14 years she spent in Tibet, she gives an account on the art of warming oneself without fire up in the snows. The endurance of these monks, she said, is ascribed the power which they have acquired to generate tumo. She went on to explain. The word tumo signifies heat, warmth, but is not used in Tibetan language to express ordinary heat or warmth. It is a technical term of mystic terminology. It is kept secret by the lamas who teach it, and they do not fail to declare that information gathered by hearsay or reading is without any practical result if one has not been personally taught and trained by a master who is himself an adept. Sometimes a kind of examination concludes the training of the Tumo students. Upon a frosty winter night, those who think themselves capable of victoriously enduring the test are led to the shore of a river or lake. If all the streams are frozen, a hole is made in the ice. Don't mention that to Rasputin, no. Point. A moonlight night with a hard wind blowing is chosen. The neophytes sit on the ground, cross-legged and naked. Sheets are dipped in the icy water. Each man wraps himself in one of them and must dry it on his body. As soon as the sheet has become dry, it is again dipped in the water and placed on the novice's body to be dried as before. The operation goes on in that way until daybreak. It's a lot of drying sheets. It is said that some dry as many as 40 sheets in one night. One should perhaps make large allowances for exaggeration, or perhaps for the size of the sheets, which in some cases may become so small as to be almost symbolical. Yet I have seen some Respas dry a number of pieces of cloth the size of a large shawl. Respas wear but a single cotton garment in all seasons, at any altitude. It is difficult for us to get a perfectly correct idea about the extent of the results obtained through Tumo training, but some of these feats are genuine. Hermits really do live naked, or wearing one single thin garment during the whole winter in the high regions I have mentioned. I am not the only one who has seen some of them. It has been said that some members of the Mount Everest expedition had an occasional glimpse of one of these naked anchorites. I'll just show you the photo here. Professor Herbert Benson monitors the surface body temperature of a Tibetan Buddhist monk while he practices Tumo, the yoga that enables him to produce heat. Although we see here he's actually quite fully clothed, so I wonder, is that an accurate photo? Oh, I thought we got cut off, but we didn't. But here it's quite clearly in the photo dated. The time is 10:10, February 22nd, 1981. He's got all these wires and devices attached to his left hand. Interesting. Well, my father of not so blessed memory could generate quite an astonishing amount of body heat. It's how my mother used to get me to fall asleep as a newborn infant, where she used to lay me in the small of his back where he was radiating his own natural heat, and I would just pass out and fall asleep. Back in the days, when my father was, for a brief time, a wonderful father. Pity that all changed, isn't it? Yes. Anyway, the internal control of body heat. Descriptions have long existed of yogis in Tibet and India who habitually survive extreme cold by practicing certain yogas that allow them to control the body's ability to produce heat. In 1981, Westerners were allowed to investigate this phenomenon by invitation of the Dalai Lama. A group of scientists from Harvard Medical School, led by Dr. Herbert Benson, went to India to perform experiments in collaboration with 3 Tibetan Buddhist monks. Temperature sensors were attached to various parts of the monks' bodies. By means of meditation, all were able to raise the temperature of their fingers and toes substantially, sometimes by as much as 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Other skin areas registered lesser increases, and internal temperatures remained normal. Dr. Benson believes that the monks, through their yoga, are able to dilate the small blood vessels in the skin, thus increasing blood flow and raising the surface temperature. Such feats are all the more amazing, he says, because the normal body response to cold, such as in Tibet, is to constrict those blood vessels and lower the temperature at the extremities to try and avoid frostbite, have your fingers and toes fall off. Right. The human cork. On August 13, 1931, the New York Herald Tribune published the obituary of Angelo Faticoni, who had died a few days before at Jacksonville, Florida. According to the obituary, which was headlined, "Human Cork is Dead, His Secret Unrevealed," Faticoni had been phenomenally and unnaturally buoyant. My mother was like that. She could just float around for hours and hours in her pool and not sink. It was a bit odd. I don't know if it was the extra fat or what it was, but she was a floater, my mother. He could stay afloat, for example, for 15 hours with 20 pounds of lead tied to his ankles. Faticoni could sleep in water, roll up into a ball, lie on his side, or assume any position asked of him. Once he was sewed into a... I just kind of have to laugh at that wording. Assume your position! I'd have so much fun with that. All the things I would make him do. That's not kind, is it? But anyway, you have to laugh. Once he was sewed into a bag, I would not have done that. I think that's a bridge too far, just saying. And then thrown head foremost into the water. Ooh, nasty. With a 20-pound cannonball lashed to his legs. Even nastier. You see, there's people out there that think of very sadistic ways to try and make you not float. His head reappeared on the surface soon afterward, and he remained motionless in that position for 8 hours. Another time he swam across the Hudson tied to a chair, weighted with lead. Some years ago, he went to Harvard to perform for the students and faculty. He had been examined by medical authorities who failed to find support for their theories that he was able to float at such great length by the nature of his internal organs, which they believed were different from those of other men. Why would they be different from those of other men? I mean, that's just silly, isn't it? But anyway, Faticconi had often promised to reveal the secret of how he became the human cork. But he never did. Here's a photo of him floating off the top of a chair that he's tied to. Angelo Faticconi, the human cork, was photographed floating easily while tied to a weighted chair. Doctors could find nothing to account for his extraordinary buoyancy. Well, that's cool, because that's a story I've never heard of before. The Incredible Floating Man. I wonder if he stooped my mother at some time in Australia. You don't know. I mean, she floated too. Maybe not as well as he did, but she was pretty good. Used to impress me greatly. What can I say? The Virgin and the Anarchist. 12-year-old Marietta Bicot was looking out of the window of her home in Banat, Belgium, on the evening of January 12, 1933. It was about 7 p.m, and her young brother was due home from his friends. Suddenly Marietta saw a light outside in the garden. Shining in the night was the luminous, bright figure of a woman, her posture erect, her head inclined slightly to one side. Marietta called for her mother. Mrs. Bicot also saw the strange figure. "It must be the Blessed Virgin," she said, half jokingly, to her daughter's repeated questions. Soon the vision faded, at least as far as Mrs. Bicot was concerned. But her daughter could still clearly see the shining woman, and she began to say the rosary. At last the figure disappeared, and when Marietta's father came home, he laughed at his daughter's experience. The Bicots were one of the poorest families in the area and, although nominally Catholics, had little time for church going. Despite this, Marietta began to attend catechism, I think it's pronounced, at the local church. The priest, Abbé Jamin, listened to her story of the Shining Lady, and at first put it down to a vivid imagination, encouraged by the recent apparitions of the Virgin, who were reportedly seen at Beaurain, not many miles away. On Thursday, January 19th, Monsieur Bicot found his daughter praying on the garden path. He was worried and went to solicit Abbé Jamin's help. Why am I mixing up my words? It's a worry, isn't it? Must be getting tired. The priest was out, so Bicot got a neighbour instead. They came upon Marietta as she was leaving the garden and tried to induce her to come indoors. "She's calling me," she answered, set off down the road. Together they followed along behind the child. Soon she came to a small roadside spring and knelt down beside it. Seemingly listening to something the two men could neither hear nor see, she plunged her hands into the water. "This spring is set apart for me," the child murmured, as though repeating something she had been told by an invisible presence. Later in the garden, she again saw a vision and asked, "Who are you, madame?" The girl then replied, as though answering her own question, "The Blessed Virgin of the Poor." Nearly 14 months before these events at Banó, Benito Pellegrini Garcia's right arm had been seriously injured in a boiler explosion in Barcelona. Medical efforts in Spain, Italy, and Germany had failed to heal the arm, and Garcia was unable to work. His wife, a Belgian woman, urged him to make a pilgrimage to Banó, where the healing spring of the Virgin of the Poor had become well known. But Benito was an anarchist and would have nothing to do with such superstitions. Well, I'm an anarchist and I believe in superstitions. Not everything, but many things. Why not? It's a big universe, even for anarchists. But anyway, that's his problem, not mine. At last, Garcia's daughter, who had turned 13, threatened to find work in domestic service to help the family unless her father consented to try the healing powers of the spring. Garcia could only succumb to such pressure and reluctantly agreed to make the pilgrimage. As a token of willingness, if not good faith, he also vowed to abstain from alcohol and tobacco during the journey. On July 4th, 1933, the Garcias set out on foot for the Belgian shrine. They had no money for lodgings and very little for food, except for the small amounts Mrs. Garcia managed to earn by obtaining occasional knitting jobs when they stopped to rest for the night. As they neared Banó, Garcia's nerves were thoroughly frayed. If nothing happened at the shrine, he promised, he would leave his wife there and go back to Spain alone. Finally, when they were no more than half a mile from their goal, his resolution failed. He slipped away from his wife, found a kindred anarchist who was willing to lend him 100 francs, and was gone for several hours. Mrs. Garcia became frantic. With the help of the police, she found him and persuaded him that it was foolish to have come so far only to turn back. Together they made their way to the spring. Garcia, in a mood as far removed from faithful confidence as possible, as he approached the spring, Garcia was given a bucket of its water. He placed his right hand into the bucket and was surprised to find that the water was almost boiling. Then he dipped his uninjured left hand in it. To his amazement, the water now felt cool. A doctor at the scene suggested that he not touch the water from the common pool because it might make his wound more septic. Still unbelieving, Garcia therefore placed his arm into a fresh bucket of spring water and appealed, "If you are the Virgin of the poor, prove it. Here is a poor man who has come all the way from Spain." To his stupefaction, and to the amazement of those around him, the wounded arm healed visibly in the water. Benito Garcia, a poor man without faith, had been cured. The Fire Virgins of Suriname. Not an ordeal, but an orgy. That was how Rosita Forbes described the traditional fire dance of Suriname, Dutch Guyana, that she witnessed in the mid-1930s. Only men take part in the ceremony, but their immunity to the waist-high flames in which they cavort, to the blazing boughs they embrace, and to the glowing embers they chew, is bestowed by a virgin priestess. As long as she remains in a trance, the dancers are safe. But when the trance ends, so does the immunity, and when she gives the signal, terminating the spell, the men quickly leap from the fire to safety. The role of the virgin priestess is not hereditary, and the young women selected for it receive no special training. Instead, they are chosen by their parents when they demonstrate as children an ability to walk on or stick their feet in the fire burning in the hearth, or pick up and play with the live coals. Those who participate in the fire dance are said to gain the power of healing the sick. And below is a photo which is attached to the next story I'm about to read to you. For the fire walking ceremony of Mbenga, an island in Fiji, stones are heated in a pile of burning brush and logs until they glow, after which they are levelled with rakes fashioned from long poles and twisted vines. And here you see, yes, they are indeed all men from what I can ascertain, stoking the coals or the fire. Firewalkers and water babies. The people of Mbenga, one of the smaller of Fiji's tropical islands, harvest coconuts, lemons and bananas, and once a year observe one of the world's most astonishing religious ceremonies. The night before the ceremony takes place, those who are to participate offer prayers to Tui Namoliwai, the water god. In the Maori religion, he's called, I just went blank, isn't that weird? It will come to me later. I can't believe it's just gone out of my head. Like a block just went down. Anyway, it'll come to me later. I'll put it in the comment section. Come on, Tony, you know what his name is. Anyway, we'll carry on because we're in Fiji right now. Meanwhile, others lined the bottom of a pit 25 feet long, 10 feet wide and 6 feet deep with stones, most of them about 10 inches in diameter. On these a layer of logs is laid, then a layer of brush, then more stones, and on top a second layer of logs. The fire is lit and left to burn all night. By morning the heat is so intense that those who tend the fire, pulling partially burned logs out of the way and smoothing the bed of stones, must do so with long poles. By now the stones are aglow with heat and the participants in the ceremony are gathered in a hut to offer final prayers. Leaving the hut, their leader unhesitatingly enters the pit. His companions follow and together they circle the pit. They are barefoot and keep their balance with some difficulty on the irregular stones. Their faces show no flicker of emotion. They leave the pit at the point where they entered it and make their way back to the hut. As they do, the onlookers applaud and toss the roots of Dracaena plants into the pit, then cover the roots with leaves and dirt. The ceremony is over for another year, and if the men have properly prepared themselves, mentally or spiritually, they will have suffered no harm. If they have not, the consequences can be disastrous. In the 1940s, one fire walker was so badly injured that both his legs had to be amputated. Dear goddess, it's shocking, isn't it? And yet the preparations in no way involve any kind of physical protection for the feet. In 1950, Dr. Harry B. Wright of Philadelphia published an account of his observation of one fire walk. He found that the feet of two of the walkers, examined shortly before they ventured onto the glowing stones, were sensitive to the approach of a burning cigarette or to a pinprick and showed no sign of having been coated with any kind of protective substance. After the walk, the feet were covered with ash, but were not at all burned or blistered, and were still sensitive to the cigarette and pin test. How does that make sense, people of Earth? It's amazing, isn't it? When Dr. Wright asked for an explanation of what he had witnessed, the leader of the walk said that the water god sent hundreds of water babies to spread their bodies over the stones, and the men walked on the cool backs of the water babies. Sweet, isn't it? No license to heal. How many pages have we got there? Because I'm starting. Oh, we're not far from completion. No license to heal. The story of the Brazilian healer Arrigo, one of the most mystifying figures in the history of occult medicine, began with dreams, headaches, and a political campaign. It ended with a crowd of some 20,000 mourners and a controversy as unresolved today as it was when Arrigo was alive. Arrigo's given name was José Pedro de Freitas. He was a farmer's son born in the Belo Horizonte district of Brazil in 1918. His nickname, Arrigo, by which he was known, was given him while he was still a child. It can be roughly translated as country bumpkin. When he was at school, Arrigo was occasionally troubled by strange hallucinations. He would see a blinding light, and sometimes he would hear a voice speaking in a strange language. As a young man, Arrigo went to work in one of the nearby iron mines, and by the time he was 25, he had been elected president of the union local. After leading a strike in protest against the brutal working conditions, he was fired. Arrigo next began to earn his living as the manager of a bar in the mining town of Congonhas do Campo. Please forgive my very bad Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese, so I have to guess. I know. The dreams that now began to plague him nightly, often leading him with a severe headache, leaving him with a severe headache. Oh dear gods, I don't speak English either when I'm tired, apparently. But I speak energy. Ha ha ha, babies. I'm joking about that. Well, I do speak energy, but I'm running out of energy. It's a finite resource when you get older. Anyway, however, if you cross me, then it becomes an infinite resource, and I become more powerful and dangerous than you ever thought. Don't fuck with the Tanya, assuming that she's weak and vulnerable. Just say, it can go either way. So buck up. Oh, I hate that name, Buck. A horrible man that married my mother. I will pull myself up, and I will fight for it, and I will maintain my energy, and who knows, I might even finish this chapter. Right. Leaving him with a severe headache were more difficult to deal with than those of his adolescence. Bad dreams giving him migraines. In them he saw the operating room of a hospital where a stout, bald-headed man addressed a group of doctors and nurses in the same guttural voice that he had first heard as a child. Deeply disturbed by the insistence of the dreams and headaches, Arrigo often went to pray for help at the church of Bom Jesus do Matoncinho. Something like that. All the Brazilians just laughed at me. I'm not trying to insult your language, it's just me struggling, you understand. Bom Jesus do Matoncinho. I don't know. One day I'll learn Portuguese and Spanish. Why not? I've got time. Ancient Greek. I could have had ancient Greek lessons from Dr. Ammon Hillman by now. I didn't sign up for it. Decided I'm not interested in fighting about the Christian Bible at all, so I don't need to read it in the original Greek because it's of zero interest to me. But it'd be handy to know ancient Greek actually. I'd be able to read the Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey in the actual Greek. That would be cool to know how to do that. But anyway, Mum T's not that smart. I've decided. Sometimes it pays to be a bit vague and stupid. Less effort. Right, where were we? Then the dream doctor revealed his identity. He was Dr. Adolfo Fritz, he told Arrigo, and he had died during World War I Sounds suspiciously German or Austrian with a name like that, by the way. His own work had been cut short by his death, and he had chosen Arrigo, who was, he knew, a compassionate man, to continue it for him. Henceforward, he said, Arrigo would only find peace by helping the sick and distressed people around him. It's a heavy burden to put on someone, by the way. It's a bit chutzpahdik, actually. Could have at least asked him first if it suited him to be in service that way for the rest of his natural life, you know. Just have a bit of courtesy, respect, and consent is everything. But anyway, for several years, the vivid nightmares and fierce headaches continued. Then in 1950, events passed out of Arrigo's control. Elections were being held that year, and one of the campaigners to visit Congonhas was Lucio Bittencourt, a supporter of the iron miners in their struggle for better conditions. In Congonhas, he met Arrigo and was so impressed by his passionate advocacy of the miners' cause that he invited him to attend a political rally in Belo Horizonte, the nearest city. When the rally was postponed, Bittencourt invited Arrigo to spend the night at the hotel where he was staying, the Hotel Financial or Financial. I'm guessing people there. Anyway, unknown to Arrigo, Bittencourt was suffering from lung cancer, and his doctor had advised an immediate operation in the United States. As Bittencourt was about to fall asleep that night, the door of his room opened and someone put on the light. It was Arrigo. His eyes were glazed and he was holding a razor. Strangely enough, Bittencourt was unafraid. Arrigo began to speak in a thick German accent and in a tone quite unlike his ordinary voice. There was an emergency, he said. There would have to be an operation. Then Bittencourt lost consciousness. When he came to, he found that his pyjama jacket was slashed and blood-stained, and that a neat incision had been made toward the back of his rib cage. He dressed and went into Arrigo's room. At first Arrigo thought Bittencourt was drunk, but in Bittencourt's room he saw the incision and blood-stained pyjamas and realized that an operation of some kind must have taken place. He had no memory, however, of going to Bittencourt's room and denied having had any part in the bizarre affair. Shaken, Bittencourt caught the first available plane to Rio de Janeiro to see his doctor, as you do. Before we continue, here's a photo of them all gathered together. Arrigo, behind desk on the right, concentrates on one of his patients during the consultation. He was unable to explain his healing powers, but thousands attested to his success. So it's that guy behind the desk. Interesting. Now Arrigo was afraid. Perhaps he had performed the operation while in some kind of trance. Perhaps This was what the dreams and voices had been leading to. He could only pray that Bittencourt had come to no harm. He did not have to wait long for news. The doctor had taken x-rays and was highly satisfied with the result of what he presumed was American surgery. The tumour had been removed, he explained to an astonished Bittencourt, by a technique unknown in Brazil, and the patient's chances of recovery were now excellent. Then Bittencourt told his doctor what had happened, and not only his doctor, but anyone who would listen. Newspapers all over Brazil carried the story. In Congonhas, Arrigo's priest, Father Penido, took the story seriously enough to warn him to perform no more operations. But how could he stop doing something he had no memory of having done? Arrigo asked. Local spiritists hailed him as a genuine medium, but though he rejected their acclaim, the persistent visions of Dr. Fritz continued. During the next 6 years, Arrigo saw as many as 300 patients a day, and, to contain the crowds, had to move his clinic from his house to an empty church across the street. Then in, I don't know why my hair's doing flippity gibbets. Weird shit. Too much air in my hair. Right, sorry. Distracted by that craziness. Where were we? Then in 1956, under pressure from the medical establishment and the Catholic Church, he was charged with practicing illegal medicine. Great. How do you go about your practice, Judge Elieto Soares asked him. I start to say the Lord's Prayer, Arrigo answered. From that moment I don't see or know about anything else. The others tell me I write out prescriptions, but I have no memory of this. He spoke earnestly. What about the operations? The judge asked. 'Tis the same with them. I am in a state I do not understand. I just want to help the poor people. But you are doing what you were charged with, are you not? I am not the one who is doing this, Arrigo replied. I am just an intermediary between the people and the spirit of Dr. Fritz. There must have been a very determined surgeon to take possession of someone to get him to do his handiwork for him after his death. That's commitment, people, to healing. Quite an amazing doctor, if you ask me. Please don't do that to me, though. I don't need that level of pressure or weirdness or commitment. Enough problems of people hating me just for existing without that on top of it. Can you imagine? Oh dear goddess. The judge was unimpressed. Could Arrigo make this Dr. Fritz appear in the courtroom for questioning? All over Brazil, newspapers carried reports of the trial and numerous testimonies on Arrigo's behalf. According to J. Herculano Perez, a professor of the history and philosophy of education, it was, open quote, simply ridiculous to deny that the phenomenon of Arrigo exists. Medical specialists, famous journalists, intellectuals, prominent statesmen have all witnessed the phenomena at Congonhas. We cannot possibly deny the reality of his feats, close quote. Despite the favourable publicity, Arrigo was sentenced to 15 months in jail and fined 5,000 cruzeiros, approximately $270. The Court of Appeals later reduced the sentence to 8 months and allowed Arrigo a year of probation before beginning his imprisonment. During this period, he would be allowed to leave Congonhas only with the judge's permission and would have to stop his practice completely. For a time, he did stop his practice, and the headaches began again. After a while, since the local police seemed to look the other way, he began to see his patients covertly, but, at least at first, refrained from operating. In May 1958, President Juscelino Kubitschek granted Arrigo a presidential pardon. In 1961, Kubitschek was no longer in office, and the religious and medical authorities again pressed for legal action against Arrigo. But witnesses willing to testify on the prosecution's behalf were hard to find, and for months the new investigation made little headway. Then, in August 1963, Arrigo performed surgery on an American investigator, Dr. Andrija Puharich. The operation brought him back into the national headlines. Puharich, an investigator of psychic phenomena who had a medical degree from Northwestern University in Illinois, had heard stories of Arrigo's remarkable cures and had come to Congonhas to see for himself. Arrigo told him that he and his 3 companions were welcome to observe him for as long as they wished and to interview any of his patients. On the first day of their investigation, Puharich and his friends found a crowd of nearly 200 people waiting for Arrigo to open his clinic at 7 a.m. After they had all filed into the abandoned church, Arrigo told them that although it was Jesus who effected the cures he was credited with, he had no interest in the religious beliefs of those present. All religions are good. Is this not true? He said, then asked everyone to join him in repeating the Lord's Prayer. After this, he withdrew into a private cubicle for a few moments, a truly good man who does not discriminate against who he is going to mete out healing to. Basically paraphrasing what I said to Arati this morning. She said, I thought you were going to say something about you being a Jew and me being a Muslim. And I said, what does that matter? You're a human being, and I see your light regardless of whatever faith you follow. There is only one source, one God. Doesn't matter what culture or language you ascribe to it. Why would I discriminate against you? So even if we lived in Israel and they're lobbing bombs left, right and centre at each other, I don't have that level of consciousness. Probably get pissed off if I was maimed and injured though, like anyone else. Probably want revenge too. But these are human constructs, humanistic thinking. A truly compassionate, loving person will offer healing and love to someone from any walk in life, provided there's no harm intended backwards and forwards. Just say. When Arrigo reappeared, Puharich was struck by the change in his manner. His bearing was now formal and commanding, and his speech sharp. The interpreter noticed a heavy German accent in his Portuguese and a sprinkling of simple German words and phrases. Arrigo summoned the investigators into his treatment room. "Come," he said, "there is nothing to hide here. I am happy to have you watch." What Puharich saw that day staggered him. The first patient was an elderly man whom Arrigo brusquely pushed against the wall. He then took a 4-inch long stainless steel paring knife and inserted it between the man's left eyeball and eyelid. What? Ouch, right in his eye. Scraping and pressing upward into the socket. Oh dear God, that sounds extremely painful. I'm screaming on the inside just thinking about it. Scraping and pressing upward into the socket with a forcefulness that Puharich found shocking. But the patient seemed quite unperturbed. At length Arrigo withdrew the knife, noted a smear of pus on the blade, and told the old man he would get well. Then he wiped the blade on his shirt and summoned the next patient. Puharich examined the eye. He found no bleeding and no wounds. The operation had taken less than a minute. Throughout the morning, Arrigo worked in this manner, never using an anaesthetic or taking any precautions against infection. As far as the investigators could see, he employed no form of hypnotic suggestion. Bleeding was invariably minimal, and the patients appeared to feel no pain. How is that possible? Someone jabbing a non-flaming, but a knife right in your eyeball. Anyway, we continue with the story. I just had to have a little tiny freak out about that. Pretty sensitive about my eyeballs. More often than not, the treatment consisted only of the writing of a prescription, which Arrigo did at high speed and without hesitation. At 11 a.m. he announced that the session was over and that he would be back that afternoon after he finished working at his regular job in the Government Welfare Office. So far as is known, Arrigo never accepted payment of any kind for his medical work. As soon as he left the clinic, the German accent and imperious manner left him, and his usual down-to-earth, amiable character emerged again. That evening, Puharich and a journalist from Sao Paulo, Jorge Rizzini, set up a movie camera in the treatment room. If Arrigo was a sleight-of-hand expert, they would try to catch his deception on film. That night, Arrigo worked until 1 a.m. In a single day, he had treated some 200 people. Puharich was completely baffled. He knew that a convincingly thorough study of this amazing man's work would require far more time, money, and equipment than was presently available. What other tests could he make before he returned to the United States? On the inside of his right elbow was a small tumour, benign but annoying, known as a lipoma. Tomorrow, he decided, he would ask Arrigo to remove it. He would be his own guinea pig. Arrigo unhesitatingly agreed to perform the operation. Of course, he said. Has anyone here got a good Brazilian pocket knife to use on this Americano? Several were offered, and Arrigo quickly chose one. Puharich felt a sudden chill of alarm, but there was no way now for him to withdraw. He looked to see if Rizzini had the movie camera ready. Just roll up your sleeve, Doctor. Puharich did as he was told and braced himself to watch Arrigo make the incision. Arrigo, however, told him to look the other way. Less than 10 seconds later, Puharich felt Arrigo slap something wet and slippery into his hand. It was the excised lipoma. Glancing down at his forearm, he saw a neat half-inch slit oozing the barest trickle of blood. There had been no pain at all. That afternoon, the Americans left Congonhas. Puharich kept a careful watch on the wound in his arm. Arrigo had used no antiseptics, and he was on the alert for the first signs of blood poisoning. They never appeared. Despite the unhygienic conditions and the fact that no stitches had been used to close the incision, it healed quickly and cleanly. In Sao Paulo, Puharich and his friends watched the movies Rizzini had taken. They could find no evidence of trickery in them. Soon the newspapers were again buzzing with Arrigo's name and details of his operation on the American doctor. Here's another photo of him. I'll show it to you before I continue reading. And Arrigo, who was jailed in 1964, had antagonized the Catholic Church and the medical establishment for performing magic and practicing medicine without a license, which is ridiculous given he actually healed many people without the need of anesthetics or antiseptics, without stitches. Morons, overeducated morons who can't have their minds opened by faith and by belief feel the need to persecute people like that. It's actually disgusting. It really is. But anyway. Now the courts were spurred into action, and on November 20th, 1964, Arrigo was sentenced to 16 months in jail. He was allowed to leave the courtroom only to say goodbye to his wife and children, for the sentence was to begin immediately. He went home, made his farewells, and waited for the police to come. But not a single man in the Congonhas police force was willing to take Arrigo to jail, and the state police were reluctant to drive through the crowd that had gathered outside his house. As the evening wore on, Arrigo became impatient and finally walked over to the prison by himself. Even in jail, Arrigo managed to carry on his work. After he quelled a riot, the warden gave him the freedom to leave whenever he wished. Arrigo took advantage of this dispensation only rarely and always to visit the sick. While the guards looked the other way, he began treating sick prisoners, and then the crowds of people, who waited in the alley outside. Arrigo was released from jail in November 1965. Soon afterward, Puharich returned to Congonhas with a research assistant. His plan was to test Arrigo's ability to diagnose his patients' complaints, an activity not likely to rouse the anger of the Brazilian Medical Society. In the test, Arrigo gave an immediate verbal diagnosis of each patient who stepped in front of him. Of 1,000 such patients chosen at random, 545 had brought their official medical records with them. In 518 of these cases, Arrigo's spontaneous diagnosis matched that of the patient's own doctor. How could he possibly make such diagnoses and state them in modern medical terminology? Puharich asked. That's easy, Arrigo said. I just listen to what the voice of Dr. Fritz tells me and repeat it. I always hear it in my left ear. Oh, people walking the cutest little, I think it's a chihuahua. A chihuahua crossed with something. Anyway, it's very cute. More tests of Arrigo's ability followed, this time allowing a battery of instruments, an electroencephalograph, an electrocardiogram, X-ray and blood typing equipment, a microscope, tape recorders and cameras. Tests were made on the patients before, during and after their treatment, and Arrigo's surgical technique was demonstrated for the cameras on a variety of tumours, cysts, cataracts and other complaints. The press discovered what was going on, and a horde of reporters and cameramen descended on Congonhas. It was impossible to continue the research. Puharich returned to Sao Paulo with his evidence and showed it to a number of interested professionals, including an ophthalmologist, a nuclear physicist, a medium, a psychiatrist, and a cardiologist. They could only agree that Arrigo's cures were a fact. When he returned to New York, Puharich showed colour films of Arrigo's surgery to Dr. Robert Laidlaw, former Director of Psychiatry at Roosevelt Hospital. Laidlaw observed that Arrigo's face assumed a quite uncharacteristic expression when he operated, that his hands and fingers moved with astonishing speed and dexterity when he worked, even when he was looking elsewhere, and that the incisions he made seemed to glue themselves together without stitches. Laidlaw could not explain how Arrigo had acquired surgical skills that were beyond the abilities of many trained surgeons. He too was baffled. Against the possibility that Arrigo was a skilled magician, are the following facts: that he indisputably cured numerous people, or to be quite precise, the numerous people experienced cures immediately or soon after his treatment. That he made real incisions which bled little and healed despite the unhygienic conditions attending them. That his patients experienced little or no pain during or after his surgical procedures, despite the lack of anaesthetics, that he was able to diagnose illnesses at a glance and write accurate prescriptions, despite having had little formal and no medical education, and that, so far as is known, he never accepted money for his medical work, but supported his family by working at an ordinary job. José Pedro de Freitas, known to the world as Arrigo, died in a car accident on January 11th, 1971. Which is a great loss, a great, great loss to the world. Someone with such miraculous abilities. Holy water. Joe Riker of New Haven, Connecticut, refused to have an operation in 1974. The cancer had made a hole in his skull, laid bare the brain itself. Oh dear goddess, how excruciatingly painful would that have been? You're going to get meningitis, said the surgeon who dressed the wound for him every week. Any day now, and die. That thing is going to get your brain. No operation, Joe said. I know exactly how he feels. Exhibit A. I refuse to get treatment for it.
Good evening, Frog.
It's just one thing too bloody many. One thing too much. Sometimes you've just got to be defiant. Still, it's been a painful healing, I must say. But it would have been a painful healing even with medical treatment. C'est la vie, babies. One week Joe did not come to have his wound dressed, nor did he come the week after. A month went by, and the surgeon who had been treating him went over to the diner where Joe was a short order cook. Joe was behind the counter, wearing his fedora as usual. Yes, he said, he would come to the surgeon's office later that afternoon. When he arrived, he took off his hat and inclined his head. Instead of the hole in his skull, there was now a fragile bridge of new skin. What happened? The surgeon asked. You mean that? Joe pointed to the top of his head. Oh, well, he said, the wife's sister. She went to France and brought me a bottle of water from Lourdes. I've been washing it out with that for a month. And I've got a little story to tell about that. So, when I was 13, we'd returned to New Zealand, from living in Melbourne, returned to go back home to my home city, Wellington, New Zealand, so I could attend high school, Wellington Girls College. Fucking awful school, but never mind, it was what it was. Never did well in institutions of any kind. There's always some god-awful bullying or systemic abuse or some ugliness. But anyway, that's not what my story's about. So my mother had that must have been 1979 when I was 14, because my mother had gone on a trip to Europe, to America and on to Europe with my stepfather Cornelis van der Graft, Uncle Case. But she brought back from Lourdes a bottle of holy water in the shape of the Madonna, the Virgin Mary. And my mother was Lutheran, not a particularly religious Lutheran, and an occultist and a witch, but it just tickled her fancy. She just decided that it was important to have this holy water for whatever reason. Made sense only to her, right? So that bottle of holy water was standing on top of our, it was like a wall, but then an opening to the top that divided the kitchen and dining area from the living area, and the doorway beside it. So she had, as she often did, my mother, very scatterbrained and a bit defective even as a younger woman, long before she got Alzheimer's. She'd lost her purse. And so she received a phone call from some gentleman saying that he had found her purse, and in it had her name and address and telephone number, which was how he was able to phone her. And would it be okay if he dropped it around about 7 o'clock in the evening? And my mother said, oh yes, of course. She was absolutely thrilled. And our house in Island Bay had stone steps on the side, and you had to go up the steps and around the back to enter where we lived upstairs, actually from the back of the property. So I was standing in the front lounge. She had said that some gentleman was popping around to return her purse. So it didn't faze me, meant nothing to me. I was glad my mum was getting her purse back, but it didn't impact on my day all that terribly much, It's just yet another example of her getting purses given back to her. She'd lost a handbag in Paris, France, and a Frenchman returned it to the same police station she was reporting it lost, and she ended up having a rip-roaring affair with him. So, anyway, this gentleman arrives, and all I could think of was, here we go again. My mother with her pattern of losing purses and handbags and running off with strange men, am I right? Yeah, baby. So I was walking around, the living room, just musing about this, wondering when this stranger was going to arrive. And I happened to look up at the ceiling, and there was a shadow made by the shape of the bottle of the holy water sitting on the ledge of the I don't know what you call that. It's not quite a wall because it didn't go all the way up. Anyway, she had ornaments sitting on the mantle of it. So I look up, and across the ceiling is the shadow of the Madonna, the Virgin Mary. So I called my mother in. I said, Mum, come and have a look at this. She says, what are you talking about, Tanya? I said, look up at the ceiling, tell me what you see, Mum. Because I thought sometimes, even as a child, when I saw things like that perhaps I was crazy or imagining it. So my parents had a very vicious habit of always telling me that I was stupid and insane, which I was neither of those things, but they were vicious, horrible, fucking low-level entity people, really. So probably I should have bathed myself in the holy water from Lourdes and got myself free of those arseholes, but I was 14. It hadn't occurred to me, especially being raised as a Protestant, to really worry about those things. Anyway, I look up and I see this distinct form of what looked like the Virgin Mary, shadow across the ceiling, and of course was reflected from the bottle standing with the light behind it. But it had been there for months, and we'd never seen that before. So I said to my mother, I think you better sit up and take notice when this man arrives. My mother said, yes, that seems sensible, Tanya. She was a little bit freaked out too. So we hear the sound of someone coming up the side of the house and along the back and knock on the door, open the door. It's a very nicely, not smartly dressed, but, well dressed, casually dressed, but nicely dressed gentleman standing there, looking very eager and excited indeed. Well, it was his Christian duty, So he's standing there, my mother says, oh, please come in, and can I make you a cup of tea? He said, oh, that would be lovely. She said, I want to give you a reward for bringing back my purse and my handbag. He said, no, madam, that won't be necessary. He said, I see it as my duty as a good Christian to do such a thing, So I'm staring at him, me, little old me, who even at that age wanted to be a Jew. I'm looking at him and I'm taking all this in, his mode of speech and the way he's kind of spoken, his demeanour. And I'm looking at him and I'm looking up at the shadow on the ceiling and I'm like, what the fuck? Who is this man? Right? I was kind of already prepped for it. So anyway, my mother very warm and welcoming makes him a cup of tea and we're sitting around the table having a cup of tea. It was a done thing in those days if you invite someone and make them a cup of tea in New Zealand, and it's done less often now, but those days everyone kept open doors unlocked, everyone walked in and out of each other's homes, and we never had to worry about home invasions or that much about robberies, for example. It was the 70s was a much more laissez-faire time to be alive in, although we did have a fairly major robbery when I was 13. But anyway, so I'm looking at this gentleman who seemed to me to be in his late 40s. So my mother asks him, she said, are you married? And he blushed deeply. And he said, yes, I am married, in a way. She said, oh, in a way, whatever do you mean? And I'm looking at him, he's looking at me. Nothing's overtly been said yet. So then my mother brightly says, oh, well, do you have children? And again he put his head down, kind of blushed, and he said, yes, I do, but they are not my children, yet I have many children. And my mother said, oh, whatever does that mean? And I looked at him straight away and I said to him, you're a priest of the Catholic faith. Yes, he said. How did you guess that? I said, you're married to God and you have many children because you probably teach Sunday school and have contact with your parishioners and your congregants. Yes, he said, that's very observant of you. And my mother looked at me, she said, how did you guess he was a priest straight away? I said, I can tell by his bearing and shyness and sweetness, actually. Even my mother looked at me, but astonished. So she said to him, well then, Father, we immediately reverted to calling him Father, since we had discovered he was a priest. She said, well then, Father, since you do not wish to take a monetary reward for your kindness in returning my purse to me, but you've gone out of your way to make contact with me and it's time taken from your duties. She said, would you accept another kind of gift? My mother being deliberately a little bit ambiguous because, she was after all a femme fatale. So he looks at her and he said, that would depend, madam, on the quality of the gift. And we burst out laughing, He really was clever, but sweet. So my mother points up at the bottle from Lourdes, France. She said, would you be willing to accept a bottle of holy water that I have brought back from Lourdes, France? And he looked in amazement, like he had won the Christmas hamper. And she said to him, I think, Father, it would be a more fitting gift for you, having come from Lourdes, that you and your professional auspices would know the right person to minister it to, that may actually be in greater need than I. I looked at my mother, She was an evil piece of shit, my mother. She really was. She was evil to me my entire life, most of my entire life. But there were a few rare moments that redeemed her, and that was one of them. That she had chosen to bring back the holy water from Lourdes and was willing to sacrifice it and give it as a reward, as a gift to a Catholic priest to minister to his sick congregants or parishioners. I looked at her and I thought, the redemption of the evil one. Pity it wasn't, quite enough, because she kind of got worse and worse as the years rolled on, but that was one thing she did that was truly a Christian, righteous thing. So the priest, I actually demurred. He was excited. You could see his eyes light up, but he actually demurred. He was a gentleman about it. He said, oh, he said, but Mrs. Phillips, he said, you brought it from Lourdes and you might need it for your own healing or needs. Father God, she needed to douse herself in that stuff and maybe purify herself of all her viciousness and evil and rot. But I was in denial about these things at 14. I was in denial about it right up until her death, when the will came out and I saw how evil and rotten and vicious she truly was. By then I was 45. So then I could be in denial about it no longer, but I'd spent 45 years in denial. But anyway, with a little bit of persuasion, we sent the Catholic father home, in gratitude for returning her purse with the bottle of holy water from Lourdes, France. And he was thrilled, and my mother was thrilled, and I was sanguine and circumspect, but kind of astonished, because even after he left our home, for about an hour later, now bear in mind the bottle had gone with him, was no longer reflecting the light or casting a shadow. There remained the shadow of the Virgin Mary on our ceiling for about an hour after, till it eventually faded away. And that, my friends, my YouTube subscribers, those who stumble upon my channel, and the few enemies who lurk here with Schadenfreude because they hate me but they can't bear one moment to not know what I'm up to. Suckers. Is a true story directly from my childhood. and I've never forgotten it. And you can, as a practicing witch, you can make your own holy water. There is a way of doing it, praying over it, adding salt, etc., etc. But nothing would be quite as holy as water from that spring in Lourdes. So one can only hope that that very kind, sweet priest did put it to good use, perhaps even on his own self, or however it got utilised. So this concludes today's reading. It continues on with Signs and Wonders, which are again more Catholic focused, Catholic centric. Here you have the story of the children of Fatima. So I may continue with that chapter. It's the last chapter of this book, actually. But there's other ones I haven't read to you. Well, I'll think about it. I'll just pick what's interesting, and or I may not. I may just read another book to you. I don't want it to be all about one particular religion over the other, because they are lovely stories and it's a big multiverse and all paths lead to one. But I've started reading this story, The Dream Fighter and Other Creation Tales by Ted Hughes, and that's quite lovely too. So I may read some of these little stories to you. These are more taking the form of folk tales and shamanistic type tales, which is, about animals and so on and so forth, which are quite lovely. So I may do that. I haven't decided people though. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's reading of the 27th of February 2025. Still a hot evening at 6:31 p.m. It's still 27 degrees Celsius outside. And anyway, wherever you are, beautiful souls, other earthlings, other sentient beings, and non-sentient beings like buildings and houses and rocks and crystals, wherever you are, be at peace, be in joy and delight, be the best version of yourself, whatever form you've taken, been gifted by the gods. There is that too. And blessed be from Titania's realm at Sacred Space. Bye.